10, 9, 8. Go for main engine start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the shock cord, and I'm going to replace it with this fabric shock cord, which has some rubber line tubes inside of it. And we're going to replace this, which is the rubber stuff that comes in the kit, which can fail a lot easier. So what I need to do is I need to measure. The reason they give you so much of this is so the nose cone, when it launches off of the rocket in the ejection phase, comes off there at a pretty hard pace, and you don't want it to tear anything out. So you want, this gives the nose cone time to slow down and the parachute recovery system to slow down. You just don't want this short, or it just will snap. So that's why they give you so much. They're not giving you extra, they actually want you to use the whole thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this stuff and I'm going to match the length, and because it is a pretty good length that Estes recommends that they give you. So we'll go to here. Okay. And this stuff's pretty inexpensive, so if it gets kind of crispy after a few launches, just replace it. And you got plenty of places to put the shock cord mount, and we'll give it a little extra because we're going to do some tie-offs. So, okay, so now this goes back in the bag for spare, and back in the flight pack if I ever need it when I'm out at the field and I don't have anything else. Okay, so now one of the things I'm going to do also is the ends of these can get frayed, as all nylon stuff does, but we can actually fix that by heat curing and closing the ends of these from getting frayed. So what I'm going to do is I'll show you exactly here how we're going to do this. Okay, I'll give you a better look at it here. And I've got my trusty little candle here, so we'll light that. I don't like using just the lighter to do it because this gives you a free hand. So, and remember, you're dealing with flames, so be very careful when you got flammable stuff around your workbench too. So just pay attention and make sure you extinguish it when you're done. So I'm going to take this, I can get it close, and it's going to ravel up those little ends and you'll be able to see it. I don't need to actually go in the flame, but just close to it. And it melts that nylon plastic into kind of a ball. Let's do the other side. This one's really frayed. There we go. Okay. Extinguish the flame, make sure it's completely out. Put it somewhere where it won't get in trouble. And we've got the pocket, which is also called the tea bag, which looks like a little tea bag once you're done. And we're going to put that together using some white glue, and the instructions are calling for, to the right page here. Okay. So they're showing that you take, putting glue on the number 2 spot, laying the cord here, put in glue on the number 2 and number 1 spot, laying the cord here, and then folding it over. They did change that a little bit. They used to say just to put it here, fold it over, and then put glue here and fold it over, which is hard to get underneath there. So they're actually doing it all in one step, which is kind of nice. So what we will do is get out our tight bond glue. Okay. Going to try to put this stuff down in a smooth layer. Even though we want a good tight bond with a bit of glue, we want it in a tight layer because, or thin layer, because you don't want this stuff to get too wet and just get mushy. Again, that'll compromise the integrity of the thing. So we're going to put the glue on number 2 here. We're going to spread it out about like so, and then we'll put it on number 1. Okay. Now we will take one of the ends of our shock cord and we're going to lay it up to the number 2 mark and center it as best we can. So something like that will work just fine. And then we're going to take and we're going to flip it around here. Oops, actually they're doing it the other way around. I take that back. They're doing number 2 and 3. And it doesn't matter if we got it on number 1, but we'll build it like they say. So we're actually going to put it on these 2. Okay, that way everything overlaps itself. So we're going to take the number 1 and fold it over at the fold line. Okay. And now what I want to do is I want to make sure that this gets in tightly. That way it won't bulge out and interfere with any of the ejection equipment like the parachute and so forth. And then we're going to fold it over again at the next fold line, keeping the cord straight because you want it as straight as possible so it doesn't pull at an angle and tear anything. Okay, and we'll squish it down. You can see how tight that is. Okay, now I'm going to, while it's starting to set, this is going to be on against the back of the tube. So we want it at kind of a curve. So I'm just going to press a curve into it, like so. And then we'll be ready to actually put it in the tube. Now, this goes in the upper tube, so make sure you get the right tube. So this is our upper tube. I want to mark F for front and R for rear. Reason being is if I put the shock cord up here and then accidentally put that against the other tube, then I got real problems. So, okay, so they are asking you to put it in 1.5 inches. I always like to put it in as far as I can. It doesn't hurt anything to put it in as far as you can. That's about 3 inches on the finger here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some glue on the back of this. And this stuff sets up pretty quick, so we're about ready to do it. So let's take our glue and put it over the back here. And the only reason I wouldn't use epoxy or any other type of glue to do this is because it tends to get a little thick. And like I said, you want this as thin as possible and as smooth against the tube as possible. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the front marked 1 and I'm going to put it curved side towards the tube, and I'm going to push it as far as I can with my finger down in the tube. See if I can get it further down there. Okay, so I've got at least that amount of distance in there, 1.5 inches. You kind of see it down in the tube there, and that way the cone and everything will sit in here and not get jammed up in there on that piece as well. So I'll make sure that I'm going to tamp it down with my finger. Just make sure it is completely as smooth as I can get it. Okay, and then we will let that dry, and we've got our cord ready to go. I will put a swivel on the end. I'll show you that when we get to it, when I put the parachute system on it. But that tube is ready to go. So we'll set that aside. Okay, now the fins that I've been working on, I put the piece of carbon fiber here on the end and wasn't sure about the epoxy, but it is holding really, really tight. I mean, I tried to really pull that off and it's staying good on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tape off of these. I'm going to put just a hair of super glue on there on the edge just to fill that gap so nothing gets underneath it, air or anything like that. So I'm going to take my super glue and hopefully we can get it moving here. Okay. Put that away. Okay. Put some super glue out. Try and cap it good. Apparently I didn't last time. Okay. And I'm going to make sure I've got a paper towel to work with, and I'm just going to put a little bead of super glue along the gap where that carbon fiber is actually going up against the wood. Just getting it down in there. It flows pretty good. Okay. And I'm just going to smooth it out. Make sure you get on the edges. And then quickly, and I mean quickly, I'm going to take a paper towel and wipe the excess off. And just quickly, because you don't want this paper to get glued to it. And then that'll push it in there, making kind of a miniature fillet. Now, I can take my accelerator here, this stuff here, which accelerates super glue instantly, and just apply it down the edge. That way I can continue building. This stuff will kick it within a few seconds. Just make sure you clean off the table. Okay, so once I do that, what I'm going to do is just give it a light sanding with my sanding stick so everything's level. If one of these pieces was a little too high or a little too low, then once I sand it smooth, there won't be any breaks, so to speak. If I have the fin here and the piece like that, it's going to act like a break and slow the rocket down. So we want that completely smooth, so we'll just give it a light rubbing with the heavy and then a polish. Then we'll do the next coating of sanding sealer. Let that dry, flip it, dry, do it, dry it, and then again with the steel wool, polishing it out, and we'll do that. Basically, we're going to do it 3 times on either side. We're going to make 3 coats, and that should give us enough to seal those up. So we'll start working on that. Okay, that's all dry. I'm going to give it a little bit of a sand, just so we're even. Make sure it's flat. You don't want to round it, really. I mean, it doesn't hurt it that much, but just for aesthetics, we want to get it right. So we sand that, the coarse 220, and then we can sand the edge too, just to make sure it's smooth. So you grab your rocket there, you won't get a nasty surprise. Flip it over, do a little polishing. That way it's nice and smooth, and that way, once we get those sanding sealer coats, this will actually be embedded in all those coats of clear. Okay, tip number 198 or whatever. Basically what I'm going to do, and I've explained this in some of my other videos, the Sasha rocket video goes into depth about keeping the center of gravity forward of the center of pressure to make sure it flies correctly. You always want that to happen. Basically, you want your center of pressure at least 1 body tube's length away from the center of gravity. That way, if they're reversed or very close, your rocket can actually pivot and it'll start flying crazy. So you want that center of gravity up there. You can move your center of gravity way up here if you want to, just that's going to make the rocket heavier with adding weight to it to do that. So we want to keep it somewhat minimal weight. So this rocket does not come with any weights because it has 2 tubes and it's very long, so it has a quite a long distance. But I am adding some weight here, even though it's very small, of these graphite rods here. They're not very heavy, but they are at the extreme end of the rocket, so that actually will add a little bit of pivot, more than if they were up at the front. So I'm just to be sure, I'm going to add a little bit of weight to the nose of the rocket, just to make sure I bring that center of gravity forward. So I've got this modeling clay, and this is plastilina. You can get Estes makes some clay that works just fine, and theirs is a little stickier. But this stuff's all I can get right at the moment, and it'll still work. And this is non-drying clay. This is oil clay. That's what you want, because you don't want the dry in the nose cone and then start rocking around in there. You want it to stay put. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a small chunk of this, which will be about maybe somewhere around 1 ounce. And I'm just going to take this much, which is about the same size as the square that the Estes clay comes in. And what I'm going to do, I don't need much because the rocket is long. If it was shorter, I would really load it up with maybe 2 to 3 or 4 of these. Again, you want to keep your rocket light, but not at the cost of your rocket going out of control. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually make this into a little snake. I'm going to take my nose cone, which I've sanded and polished. Everything's good and ready to go on that. I'm going to put this in the nose cone. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a stick, one that's long enough to go all the way to the tip, and I'm going to push this down in the nose cone as far as I can. And the reason that I do this is you can use less of it if you put it further forward. Okay, so that's going to be pushed into the end. I don't know if you can see it. You can shine a light through it to actually show where it is. You can kind of see. Let me see if I can actually just see it here. You can see it's actually at the end of the cone right here, and that's, like I said, the harder you pack it in, the less likely it is to fall and drop back, which actually it just did. So I need to really pack that stuff in there. So we'll do that just as an in case. Okay, I've cut from the fin stock frame a piece that works, and it's long enough, and it'll push that in there and get that. See, we're just tamping it down, making sure it's as far as forward as possible. Like I said, further forward, less you need. You can put BBs in these things and then follow it up with some epoxy, but it doesn't stick to this plastic very well, and it makes a slug, and it'll drop all the way to the back. So test it, we'll do that, make sure it's staying in there, and it is. So that's ready to go. Okay, time for coat 2 of the stinky, smelly, yucky sanding sealer that works great. There's always a compromise. Stuff that works great usually is pretty toxic, so just be careful with this stuff. And like I said, I'm going to go over that end piece and seal it in. Okay. Now this will bead up a little bit more than that first coat because it's on top of the other coat of plastic material and not on direct wood, so you don't need as much. But there's that. So we'll do the other fins and be done and close this smelly stuff up. Okay, so at this point, after we've been doing all the other stuff, our motor mount is pretty secure in there with the glue that we put in, but we're going to do a fillet. So we're going to take our tight bond. By the way, that sanding sealer, the smell does dissipate quite quickly, which is nice, but it's just when you first open it, it's kind of crazy. So I'm just going to take the glue with my stick, and I'm going to put it in here and run it around where that gap is, which is quite substantially large. So I'm going to do a small smattering of it, and then I'm going to let it tack up, and then I'm going to do another one to reinforce that since it's such a big gap. So basically it's going to look like that. We're going to go all the way around. Like I said, let it tack up and then do it again. And by the way, definitely try to not get glue on this inside ring here, because that's where that threaded ring is going to go for the motor keeper. So just make sure you don't get anything on there, because you're going to be scraping it off and it's going to be a pain in the neck. So make sure that's clear. If you're not sure, just take a white Q-tip and smooth around it after you're done, and that way you'll be good. But keep that clear. Okay, what I was talking about is this little ring right here, and I'm going to test fit it right now before this other glue dries. And it's dropping in there real good. There's nothing there. I'm going to move it around in case there's something that's still wet. It'll smooth it out. But I want that as flush as possible to this tube because we want it as straight as possible. If it's off a little bit one way or the other, your engine might mount in there crooked. So just make sure that's fitting in there good, and it does. And we'll get ready to put that in. That's one of the last steps. Okay, actually, while we're at it, we're going to actually install that ring, because since we really don't need, it's not going to hurt anything to put it in now, it looks like. Not going to interfere with the fins or anything. Well, it does recommend to put epoxy in. It does recommend to scrape this up to give it some bite on the glue itself. So what we're going to do, I can use my sanding stick here and just roughen that up. But this one's pretty big, and we want it to, it's going to be a powerful engine, so I want the scuffing to be a little bit bigger. So what I'm going to do, and of course this is always optional, use my Dremel stylus here. I've got a little ball cutter here, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to roughen it up using that. And let's see if I can get an actually closer picture to show you what I'm doing here. Okay, so I'm just going to take this at kind of a slow speed so it doesn't actually melt the plastic. And I'm just going to put some marks and gouges on there. And I'll have to definitely clean this ring out of the material, because I don't want the glue just sticking to these pieces of grinding. But this will make the epoxy get a real good grip on this. Okay. That's all it needs. Get rid of some of that plastic filings. We'll clean it out. Okay, and from my other modeling materials, I have this, which is an electric toothbrush, which works great for getting rid of all that stuff. And we'll just do a rub and make sure there's nothing in the ring. Okay. Okay. Now we've got it. You can kind of see there's some grooves and stuff in there, and that'll just give it a little bit more things to hold on to. Now the other thing is, on the tube itself, I can actually get in there with my sanding stick, and I can roughen up the edge. Even though this is not plastic coated, it might help a little bit. If it was plastic coated, I definitely would want to get through that plastic coating. But we'll just give it some sanding here to give it some bond. But that epoxy will actually soak into that paper. So, okay, so let's get some epoxy going. The usual stuff. Let's make sure that we have enough of it, and we don't want to use so much of this that it oozes out into the threads or screws up the spacing of anything else, because the other piece does have to thread onto this. Okay. Take a toothpick here. Mix those together. And since we have to have the tube upright to let the fillet dry on the engine mount, we might as well do this too, because we want it to do the same thing. We want to have it vertical while it dries. That way the stuff doesn't move anywhere. Okay, so we got that set up with the mixing. So we're going to take our ring, and we're going to put a nice generous amount. Now they're showing on the instructions to put it on the tube itself. I suppose it doesn't really matter as long as I get enough of it on here. And I'm going to be pretty liberal with it. Like I said, I just don't want it to be so super thick that it gets in, makes it so the engine won't fit. I can also take my isopropyl alcohol and clean it up to make sure that any epoxy that's there gets thinned out to the point where it doesn't interfere with anything. Okay, so I've got that ready. Okay, now let's Wipe the ring here. Make sure there's no epoxy on that inner lip. Okay. And this is just going to fit straight on there. Like so. Okay. Now there is some epoxy that oozed out there. So I'm just going to take my Q-tip and I'm going to take my isopropyl alcohol. Since the Q-tip will wipe it off, but this fuzz will get stuck to it. The isopropyl alcohol to make it nice and smooth. Dip my Q-tip in isopropyl alcohol and I'll twist the Q-tip as I pull the epoxy off. Throw that one away. I'll go all the way around, making sure that it's clear and clean. Okay. Okay, that looks good. And the epoxy seems to be bridging the gap. So we'll let that dry and we should be all set with that part. Okay, just for fun, I'm going to take my dummy engine and see how it fits in there. Look at that. That's going to work pretty darn good. And it's got a little gap in there, so we are good. If we had a little bit of epoxy on the side, I don't think it would have hurt, but better safe than sorry.